Last spring, we were invited to be a part of the early adopters group of RareX, knowing that the more opportunities we have to get CACNA1A data out into the world, the better our kids will be. And so we jumped on that opportunity. After all, prior to the starting of the CACNA1A Foundation, there were no data sets available to researchers for our disease. And if you attended our conference 2 weeks ago, you know how critically important it is to have strong data in order to find new therapeutics and cures for rare disease. RareX is a data sharing platform that is being provided to our community in addition to our natural history study. It's all about collaboration, not competition. RareX data will not replace our natural history study data, but will allow for researchers to access those data sets in addition to the data collected in RareX. I'll let the RareX team take it from here and explain more. So I'd like to welcome Tom Hume, who's the head of marketing and communications, and Megan O'Boyle, who's the patient engagement leader and a rare mom herself. Thank you, Megan and Tom.
Thank you, everybody. I'll just let Tom share a little bit, and then I'll kick it off.
Sure. My name's Tom Hume. Excuse me. I've been with RareX a little over a year, and mostly marketing background, but I am also a rare disease parent. In our case, my middle son, Parker, has juvenile dermatomyositis. It's an autoimmune rare disease, and so I'm very entrenched in the rare patient advocacy area. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you, and it's just a pleasure to be launching this incredible data collection now with CACNA1A. Let me just get the settings here. So I live in Arlington, Virginia, not far from Washington, D.C., and not far from the NIH and FDA. I have a 20-year-old adult daughter with a rare syndrome called Phelan-McDermid syndrome. I'll refer to it as PMS at times. And I've spent the last 10 years with other volunteer parents of our foundation, figuring out how to collect data, what to collect, and then getting it out the door. And unfortunately, over those 10 years, we had to learn a lot of things the hard way. We had to spend a lot of money. And at the end of the day, we were revamping our collection because we didn't have the guidance that RareX is now providing to groups like yours. So as the patient engagement lead, I'm working with groups like CACNA1A Foundation to remove the barriers and burdens that groups often face when they're collecting data, and hopefully get this data in the hands of as many researchers around the world, including those who have never even heard of CACNA1A. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. And you'll notice that it's the CACNA1A Data Collection Program instead of a registry. Word registry can be confusing. It can mean a lot of things, but it can also be very limiting. And RareX is doing a lot of things other than just collecting data. So these are the things that we're going to cover on today's call. What RareX is, what we're trying to solve for, what this collection program is going to look like, and what the journey for you as data entry will look like. So what is RareX? We're new, and we are a nonprofit just like you, and that's how we raise our funding, through grants and sponsorships and philanthropic donations. We were created out of a lot of frustration by people in research and advocacy and industry, trying to figure out why rare disease research was not leading to more treatments and cures. And a lot of barriers were identified, as well as burdens to groups like yours. And RareX's mission is to remove barriers and burdens wherever possible. This is a platform to collect, and that's what we'll talk about today. To connect, that's what I'll touch on today, and share data. And ultimately, you can collect data all day long, but if it's not being seen and analyzed by anybody, it's really not worth it. We don't sell data. And we don't own your data. As a matter of fact, the CACNA1A Foundation does not own the data. You, as the user who enters the data, owns it, and you manage it. And I'll get into that a little bit later. RareX is powered by technologies, including that of the Broad Institute in Cambridge. We will also partner with technologies that are doing things well already. We are Like your foundation, you should never reinvent the wheel that another nonprofit has already invented. We don't plan to invent technologies that we can partner with that have already been created. So just a little background on data, rare disease data. So there's various possibilities for rare diseases. Sometimes the data exists, but it's captive in silos. It's at a certain university or a certain medical center, and the consent was that, that it could not be shared for certain purposes, or the researcher is no longer getting funding, or they're no longer interested, or they're retired, and the data is sitting there, but it's not being used. Another scenario is something I started to describe, where data was collected. It just wasn't exactly the right data, or it wasn't collected under the right governance, so it's not allowed to be used. And that's, in those situations, that means time, money, and effort has been wasted. So on this busy slide, we'll start at the top. These are 10 early adopters or pilots. And you should be very proud that CACNA1A is one of them. So your leadership has spent the last few months meeting with us and other organizations across the top to learn what we're going to be doing, how we're doing it, and why it is considered like gold standard. So your organization, like the others, will go in, set up accounts, and answer some surveys. The 3 surveys on the left, general info, general medical, and quality of life, are all that you will be answering in your first go. And the whole thing maybe take half an hour. Over time, based on your answers to the general medical, you may get emails, or new surveys may pop into your dashboard. If you had said yes to a certain question in the general medical, and a new survey is out related to that, then you will be notified. At the bottom is the very important group of researchers. They are from academia, they might be citizen scientists, and certainly researchers at pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies. And they will go into one portal, which has been established and used at the Broad Institute for several years. And they will provide their credentials and set up an account, and then they can start to query. The beautiful thing is they can query not just on disease or a disease, they can query symptoms, all sorts of different filters, genetics, or disease specific. And what's interesting and wonderful about this is you may have researchers around the world that have never heard of CACNA1A, have no interest in CACNA1A, but when they run their query, patients with CACNA1A show up, which may send them in a new direction of research interest. And it may mean that your patients, your community may be invited to be in a study that was not originally intended for them. So having researchers around the world stumble across a disease that they're not familiar with has its advantages. RareX is making sure that we take responsibility for what's called governance. And governance is how data is collected. How are we engaging the patient community? Are we coercing them or are we educating them? What do they have to do? Is there a burden? Then where is the data kept? Is it secure? Is it private? And then how is the data being disseminated? Is it safe? Is it de-identified? What's the criteria for the people that are using it? And on top of all of this, or at the bottom of all this, is international data regulations. Many countries have their own data regulations. Those of you who are familiar with Europe have GDPR. The United States has their own data regulations. Actually, California has their own data regulations. And RareX will take on the job of making sure that it is compliant in all the right places. So why did CACNA1A choose us? One, they shared our vision that what we were doing will speed up research and drug development. The fact that this is going to be patient-owned and managed. CACNA1A Foundation was absolutely comfortable with each patient making decisions about how their data is used. Governance, which I just explained on the previous slide, and it's hairy and sticky and nobody likes it. So we're taking care of that and they don't have to. The streamlined data access, which I described as the research portal. to get more eyes on the data. The ability to connect to existing data sources. Now, this is something that we hope to do in the near future. It's not part of the early adoption period, but if there are other studies that the CACNA1A community is involved in anywhere in the world, we'll ask you where you've participated in studies, and then we'll look to see if maybe there's data in those studies that we could combine with the RareX data. There's no cost to your organization or to you, which means that the funds that you all work so hard to raise can be used for other areas of research. And there's no cost to researchers or industry, which means there's a level playing field. Sometimes the biotechs that are working the hardest in small diseases may not be able to afford the price tag that people put on data. So more importantly, what's in it for you? Well, we're going to return data in a summarized way on a regular basis, which means that you're not just answering something and hoping that you can see an article about it in 5 years, that you'll actually see how your answers compare to the rest of the communities. So those are aggregate data summaries. It also is a tool for researchers to identify appropriate patients for studies. So the more researchers that have their eyes on your data, the more likely it is that they might identify you as somebody that might be right for their study. It may not be a CACNA study. It may be an epilepsy study or a vision study if you've got people with CVI. The fact that you're going to be able to manage your data, and this is really an advantage. The fact that you can come in and update your answers anytime, or at least annually. And we will send reminders annually, and we will pound this message into the communities whenever possible. In order to see the lifetime of the progression of disease, it's very important to see at least annual check-ins. And even when there's no change, that's actually an important research data point if there's been no progression or no regression. So we will encourage you to do this annually. In order to encourage you to do this annually, we need to keep the burden to you at a minimal. This can't be a 5-hour thing. So we'll start out as a 30-minute thing. And depending on what you say yes to, you will get additional surveys over time. First, we want to make sure that they're the right surveys and that they're collecting the right data that industry wants and FDA is willing to use. But when you go in, you have 3 surveys now, let's say 3 more get added over the next 12 months. That doesn't mean you're going to come in a year from now and have to sit down and do 6 surveys for an hour. It just means you just go into the surveys and change what is changed and leave everything else. So this data will measure all of your answers over time. So what do you need to get started? You need an email account and a password that you can remember. You do not need your medical records at this point. You do not need your detailed family history on all of your, grandparents' ailments, and you shouldn't need a lot of time. We're looking at maybe 30 or 40 minutes, and you certainly don't have to finish it all at once. We have very unpredicted lives. Just when we think we can sit down and do something, it's somebody is crying or somebody has fallen. Please use Google Chrome, Apple Safari, or Mozilla. Do not use Microsoft Edge or Internet Explorer. So this is what your experience should be like. You'll come in through your organization's website, then you will set up your account, you will do your patient consent. Patient consents are a one-time thing. So once you enter your consent, you will get a copy of it in an email, but you can't change your answers. And I'll go over that today. The data sharing preference survey, on the other hand, you can change your answers as much as you want. And that is the secret sauce. That is where you, as the user, are deciding how broadly or narrowly that you want to share your data. So that is the mechanism in which you decide who's going to get to see the data. And then you'll go in and enter the surveys. At the bottom, you'll see a patient dashboard, and that's the dashboard will show you what the status of your surveys are. So this is the awesome, actually, this is the wrong title at the top, but this is the CACNA1A community page. And that's the one that will give you the lowdown on how and why to do it. Before you even set up your account, we need to know what person you are. Are you the person with the disease? Are you the parent or guardian? Or are you a loved one of someone that's passed away? There's different consents for different populations, depending on whether you are an adult or a minor, or the parent of an adult or minor, or if you're the parent of an adult that is not cognitively able to participate, which is the situation for me. The reason why we're asking country and state is because different countries and states have different ages of majority and minority. So you are going to start off by adding a participant, and you'll see your disease in the dropdown, which is very exciting when you're a rare disease, because usually, we're other. And this is the consent. So you'll see across the top the green and the blue bubbles, and the green is where you are and the blue is what's ahead. We tried to make this as short as possible, but we also wanted to be very transparent. So there's a lot of information. And to keep that as simple as possible, we have what we call short answers and long answers. So who will have access to my information? The basic answer is on the left. A deeper dive answer is on the right. So if you're interested in more information, you can always click on Learn More. So this is the second to last page of the consent. And I want to just repeat, you can't change your answers to the consent. These two questions are very critical. One is asking if you would like to be notified about further surveys. I answered yes, because I would like to answer surveys about sleep and epilepsy and GI and the various things my daughter struggles with. The second question is, do I want to be contacted about clinical trials? And I absolutely want to be. Just because I'm contacted, though, doesn't mean I'm committed to participate in them. So these are your choices, and my choices were yes. The next page asks for legal name at birth. There's a technical reason for this, and even if your child has gone by the name of Bill his entire life, if his name at birth on his birth certificate was William, please put William. And that is true of any other study that you participate in. And it has to do with how these answers are thrown into an algorithm and they spit out a unique identifier. Ultimately, it's to make sure that if somebody's in multiple studies, you don't know who they are, but you know that it's likely the same patient. So now we're at that part where you own it, where you own and manage your data. And you have two choices, and you have to make a choice on this page. Do you want to share your data with all researchers for any reason? And that could be research on age, race, and ethnicity, or about genetic traits, or are you only interested in sharing your data with health, medical, and biomedical research? And there's obviously, you can see all the words, there's details for anybody that might have questions. If you don't check a box, you cannot proceed, and you can't check both boxes. The next page is completely optional. I opted not to answer to either question. You can answer one, both, or neither. And this is going to restrict or narrow the number of people that will be able to see your data. The first question basically says, everybody, all the researchers, but industry, because you're saying, I only want non-commercial purposes. And this is something that maybe some people don't want pharmaceutical companies to see their data. I don't think that would be the case in this community, but perhaps in other conditions. The second one is, I only want researchers that have IRB approval. That means that their research was reviewed at their institution by their governance. So I told you we handle the governance for RareX. Every institution has their own governance. So that is what they're referring to with IRB. The rest of the questions going forward are for the future. We're kind of taking your temperature to see what interest you have in sharing data going forward. It also may alert us that many of you have been in the same study somewhere, and that maybe we should reach out to that study investigator and see if we can collaborate in some way. In your instance, that would be Dr. Wendy Chung at Columbia, or perhaps the Simon Searchlight study. And so that's why these next few screenshots are being asked. First question is, have you given biosamples? That would be spit, blood, skin, whatever. And if so, do you remember where? And then, are you interested in doing that? We tend to have very motivated communities. Not all diseases are as motivated to contribute things like that. The next question is, are you interested in having your medical records collected and connected? A lot of people, think that there's a lot of valuable data in what has been collected, whether it's labs or clinical notes. We are not doing that for you right now, but we would like to know if you're interested. CACNA1A may want to invest in a third party that's doing that, and then we could partner with that third party to combine the data, so that what you put into RareX would be combined with the data that would be pulled from your medical records. Again, we are not doing this, but we'd love to know what your interest in being involved in something like that might be. The second one is about being connected with communities, which you already are. And the last one is other possible data sources. And this is where you, if you're involved in the natural history study with Wendy, then you would just, you can say New York or Columbia or whatever the name of the study is. And I've got some information on that on the next slide. So you all do have a natural history study. I believe right now it's virtual. The investigator is Dr. Wendy Chung. She presented at your conference a few weeks ago, and you can find out more on your organization's website. So this is the dashboard I talked about, and I'm just going to direct your attention to the little divot or arrow thing at the top. Currently, when this dashboard comes up, it's squished. So you only see the name, Parker Doe. So I need you to go click on that little arrow, and then it will expand the rest of the dashboard. So on this dashboard, it shows that the consent was completed, which means you've been sent an email thanking you and giving you a copy. It says that, part of the data sharing has been completed. And part of the general information is completed. General information is essentially demographics, which I'm showing you now. So the names were pre-populated here by what you put into the consent. Sorry, there we go. The patient's birthplace, it's an odd question. It also has to do with that algorithm for that identifier, is where was the patient born? So just note that it's not where do you live now, but what country, and then the city or municipality. I know it seems like an odd question. Primary language, is the patient alive? This question, we went back and forth on where to put it or whether to put it in, but we wanted patients who were enrolled and passed away after the fact to have family members be able to come back in and indicate that the patient had passed away, and be able to continue to participate and offer data. These are questions about genetic testing, and in a few months we will come back to you and we will ask you to come back in and log in and upload your genetic report. That report is loaded with identifying information, your name, your address, your doctor's name. So once that report is uploaded into your account, we will have a genetic counselor who will be notified that the upload has taken place, and they will then take that report and curate it or pull data from it and put it in a backdoor at RareX. That means if you have uploaded your genetic report, your genetic data will be attached to the answers on this profile. So this is the general medical survey, health and development. And I am stressing general because you might be frustrated and think, well, this isn't really getting to what CACNA1A is. It's not today, but based on your answers that you say yes to, it will lead to further surveys that are more detailed. And those surveys may lead to even more detailed surveys. Ultimately, what the data that you put in will be found by researchers when they query. And if you meet their query and you decide to be involved in the research that we, tell you about, that's where the real deep dive of data collection might be. So we're not going to ask everything that Dr. Chung asks, but you'll be able to go in whenever you need to update your data. So it may seem similar, but it's different and complementary. This is truly about 25 questions on all of the systems of the body from head to toe. The other thing I want to point out about why this is such an important survey is you may have patients that have more than one condition, or your disease may not be fully characterized. There may be things that are happening to adults that you all have not heard of in the research. So by asking about every system in the body, it gives you an opportunity to report on things that you may think are just coincidental. You may have something that is unrelated to CACNA1A, but qualifies you for a different study for a different reason. So again, please don't be frustrated that we're asking about things that may not be related, and we're not asking about things that are. It will come. The question at the top, how old was the patient when there was first concern about their development? I just want to point out, most surveys will say, when did the doctor diagnose? When was it confirmed? This is, when did the mama gut say something's not right? And usually that is significantly earlier than the answer to those other questions. This is our free text, which if you know anything about data analysis, you say never, never have a fill in the blank. But we purposely have this so that you can express yourself in any way you want. And we will do the standardization of the answers in the back. Again, using my daughter as an example, the first diagnosis she has is Phelan-McDermid syndrome. It's also called PMS. It's called SHANK3 deletion. It's called SHANK3 mutation. It's called ring 22, 22q13. I mean, that's just some of the names. Any of those names would be fine. Then I hit the green box and add another diagnosis. And I could put epilepsy, or I could put seizures, or I could put convulsions, or I could put complex partial convulsions. So whatever you think you're comfortable with putting. And then I just hit another diagnosis, and it was ADHD, then another diagnosis, which was autism, but I could have put ASD, and so on. And, for me, it was, I just said GI issues and sleep issues and kept going down the list. It doesn't necessarily have to be only the things that have to do with CACNA1A. This is the last survey. And quality of life is very important to us. It's important that the researchers know what the quality of life is like. We want them to research things that are important to us, not just something that they're curious about. But it's also important to FDA, because if quality of life improves after a drug trial, that's a measurable outcome. So this is a very well vetted, well thought of quality of life instrument. We are also looking for a different quality of life instrument, and we may run it by you in the coming months. And that reason is, this is not necessarily targeted for families like ours, or specifically a child like mine who is nonverbal. So we have in this survey an answer which says, unable to answer because of my child's condition or communication skills. Because as much as I would like to know if my child felt nervous, or if she felt worried, or if she was lonely, I don't know. And I like being able to at least say unable to answer because of my child's condition. It also is important for researchers to know, and if we don't have that answer and we're forced to make something, guesstimate, then that's kind of messing with the data that the researchers are going to see. So I just want to emphasize, again, we may be piloting a different quality of life survey down the road, that if we can find one that we think is more specific to the neurodevelopment community. If you have more than one family member with this diagnosis, when you get to this, you finished all the surveys, you may add participant. Depending on the age and cognitive level of that participant, you may go to a different kind of consent. We're almost done. So how is this data collection different than others? So for instance, Simon Searchlight or Dr. Chung's natural history study. One is that it's not at a specific institution. Although she may make her data available to lots of researchers, they have to know that it exists. So that's one difference. The other is that we have the ability to, researchers will have the ability to do cross-disease research. Actually, Dr. Chung actually has the same ability because she happens to collect data on lots of similar diseases. That's not always the case. We will be returning that aggregate data to your community. And some researchers may be doing that and some may not. This data is focused on drug development. So that's important because that's what people want, but it may be frustrating because your organization or community may be curious about things we're not asking. If we ask everything you want to know about, this will be a burden and you will not come back every year, I guarantee it. So we are going to ask as few questions on all the symptoms as we can. That industry is interested in and FDA is willing to look at. So there may be some things that your community wants to know about, and we'll work with Lisa and say, that's not something we're going to ask, but let's figure out a way that you all can still get that data. This is complementary. Lisa said it in the first minute of this webinar. This does not replace other studies. If you get invited to other studies, please do not think that since you're here, you don't need to be involved in them. They're going to be deeper dives. They may be in person. They may be taking blood samples. So this is not instead of, it's a complement to. And finally, this is something where you can answer and should answer every year over years and years and years. RareX intends to be here for a long time, and that's why we want you to keep coming in every year. So my apologies to those who are not English speaking, but it is absolutely on the roadmap. We just want to make sure we do it right.
Can I just reiterate something, because I hope this, I don't want this point to have gotten lost in the whole presentation, which was really thorough and terrific. Thanks, Megan. So as Megan mentioned, our natural history study is a deep dive into CACNA1A. And if a researcher is studying something to do with an ion channel or a calcium channel, they would find us and they would get access to our natural history study data. The reason why we chose to do RareX is because if there's a researcher, so Megan mentioned CVI as an example, our kids, not all of our kids, but a lot of our kids do have a diagnosis of CVI. So if there's a researcher doing a study on CVI, they may not think of CACNA1A because it's not something that all of our children have. And if your child has CVI and you're in this study, you would pop up. And then you would be able to have the opportunity to participate in a study on, let's say, maybe a drug or a treatment or something for CVI. And so it's really important, and it gives us a broader reach or broader access to researchers and to biopharma.
I just want to be very clear that the data is de-identified. That's also why we will go to great lengths to get that genetic information in, rather than have you take genetic information from your report and enter it into RareX. Really, the best way to have that done is you just upload that report, and then RareX has genetic counselors that understand the nuances of genetic data, and we'll put that information from your report into the back door.
It looks like Donna has a question.
Hi, Megan. You mentioned in part of the survey being able to identify places where we had provided skin or blood.
Any sort of biosamples. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Do you have a way to access potentially the cells that were offered to another researcher?
In theory, yes. And this is we're kind of not pushing the envelope, but we're trying to change the culture. So by asking those questions, it's giving us information. It's arming us with information. If there were several people that had participated in a biosample collection, we could reach out to Lisa, or your organization leadership and say, there's a fair number of people that have biosamples over at Rutgers. And we know that they didn't consent to share it with RareX at the time because we didn't exist, but let's set up a call with them and see if anybody's using the biosamples, who paid for them, who owns them, is there a way to reconsent, and make that introduction. There are some really collaborative researchers out there, and there are some researchers that are very territorial. And so we will always go in with we would love to have Mary Smith's sample attached to Mary Smith's data in an identified way, but the researcher would still only see de-identified data. But we would love to have the same individual matched that you have matched with the same individual we have. The initial answer is always going to be no, that's not what they consented for. If we're talking about 10 patients, it is not going to be a heavy lift for us to get you 10 patients a new consent. We'll work with our governance to figure out who has to do that. Do they need to do it? Do we need to do it? If they say absolutely not, that our institution won't let us do that, we don't have the funding for it, we don't want to do it for whatever reason, we will propose that, remember that research portal I was telling you about, that actually can connect to existing data in other places. So our goal is not just to collect data, it's to connect it. And then, like I said, most importantly, share it or disseminate it. And the more data we can get on the same patient in one place, the better.
I just wanted to ask you, there were some questions came up in relation to our natural history study with regard to patients who have variants of uncertain significance and whether or not they should complete the natural history study. And so I wanted to ask the same question to you all about our patient community that, are sitting in this sort of, their genetic reports say VUS, but they clearly have symptoms that are consistent with CACNA1A, and they just haven't been able to get their variant classified or characterized as pathogenic or likely pathogenic. Should those patients also complete these surveys? How do they indicate sort of that information besides, is there a way to indicate that separately from just uploading the genetic report? And is that data still included in our sort of pot, so to speak?
The beauty of RareX is we are being built for 9,000 diseases, including undiagnosed and N of 1. So you could put in CACNA1A, but ultimately the researchers are going to look at what your genetic report says. In RareX, we're taking all comers. What I would suggest is if I was uploading the report, I would flag it to the genetic counselor and put a little Post-it note on the first page that says, please note, non-confirmed, diagnosis of CACNA1A. And that way the data is in there. That just goes back to the whole point of we are collecting as much as we can for drug development, but we can't do the complete deep dive. Again, RareX is about looking across diseases, and we take N of 1 and undiagnosed. So one misdiagnosed patient isn't necessarily going to do any harm. Does that make sense? Sometimes I think my clarity might be more confusion.
That does make sense. And I just want to ask a quick follow-up, because the foundation is working really hard to make sure people who have CACNA1A variants of uncertain significance get classified as either benign, likely benign, or pathogenic or likely pathogenic. So they're not sitting in this sort of purgatory middle space where they don't know whether this is actually causing their symptoms or not. And so one of the things we want to do as a larger initiative that's going to take a long time, but is to get our patients, classified one way or another. And so when that reclassification happens, whether that's through the foundation's efforts or, by a lab or through Wendy Chung, would they be able to go back and essentially then be able to re-enter or clarify in their surveys?
The only thing you can't change is your consent.
Okay.
So yes, that's the beauty of it. And, we only know what we know today. So I think that's a really good point. So it's important to get as many people into this enrollment so that you can say how many people you have. And that matters because of awareness. It matters because you want to get everybody that needs the support. And frankly, it matters to industry when they're looking at two diseases that could be using the same drug and one has more patients that need to buy it. And that goes to the last thing. But Lisa, you don't have to solve any problems. As soon as somebody reaches out to you, if you could just forward it to the support@rarex.org, and we have a support person that monitors that at all times. So the only reason I want you all to go through Lisa is so that she has a confidence that either nobody's having issues or that too many people are having issues. And Lisa will get a report every Friday, just saying how many people have registered and how many of the people that registered completed their consent and surveys. And then finally, what countries they'll come from. In a few months, after a decent number of people have enrolled, she'll start to get a monthly report, which will be more aggregate, more summary, like the top 5 or 10 symptoms that you guys really want to be able to know about. We'll pull that on a regular basis and distribute it to the foundation, and then they can distribute it to you. And you may want to take it to your IEP meeting. You may want to take it to your doctor. You may want to show it to your mother-in-law that says it's not just my kid. So that's, if you have any issues, don't hesitate to, rather than going on Facebook and complaining, it would be great if you could just let Lisa know.
Couple more questions, Leanna, and then Jackie.
Okay.
Hi, my question is about age of onset, in particular for adult patients. So some of the other adult patients in the patient group have also had a similar experience where our symptoms were quite mild for years. So for example, age 8 for me, I would have said I had weird little spells when tired until age 41, when it was life altering and looked much more stereotypic, right? Hemiplegic migraine with exertion, right? We can see, you know, I look normal most days, but right now, you know, there's some exertion. And then, you know, episodic ataxia, so very classic symptoms. So, you know, age 41 or age 8, definitely it started affecting me at 8, some of the symptoms, but it really wasn't CACNA1A classic until 41.
There are no questions about age of onset in the first level. And
Okay.
I'm not even sure there will be some in the second level. There may be. If I recall the survey that I looked at, and this is from my memory, it was age of symptom and then age of diagnosis. So you could say
Okay.
8 and you could say 41.
Okay.
But it may be a while. And again, please don't be frustrated that this doesn't look like a deep dive into CACNA1A. There is a method, not a madness, to how we are rolling this out.
Hi, sorry, I can't make myself visible, but I'm from the UK here. I'm just so thankful that we're doing this, because when my daughter was first diagnosed, there was literally hardly anything on the web apart from mice and things like that. So super pleased we're doing this. I really liked some of the layout of the RareX, especially when it prompts you or seems to prompt you about, you know, eyes, teeth, neurology. I think that's really helpful, because with my daughter's CACNA1A, we seem to have got all the phenotypes going. She seems to have everything. And it seems to be a pretty severe case. The only thing I am frustrated with is we have so much video evidence of Amber May's seizures, of EEG reports, and you sort of feel as if you're sitting on a gold mine.
You
now,
are.
I know
you absolutely are. And so when we were doing the governance, we thought 5 years, 10 years ahead. We want to be able to collect wearable data, like a wearable EEG or app data. I mean, you know, some people have apps for things like behaviors and GI and certainly seizure tracker. All of that data is a gold mine, and what's locking it up is consent. When it was collected, it was locked. You know, people were so careful to protect the patient that the data can't go where it needs to go. So we are very cognizant of that. And so although we are all about protecting the patient's privacy, we are very broad in where and how the data can be connected.
My Amber-May's consultants have said that they're really willing to share whatever they can to help other people with CACNA1A. We've got things from when Amber May was a couple of days old. She was rushed into intensive care from birth.
there may be a deep dive study that you qualify for, and they may ask you, is there any chance that you've got any video? And you'll say, I got a library of it.
Yeah.
So don't get rid of it. If it's
The last thing is just to say that I think our clinicians are really, really excited. And really more and more people are coming through with CACNA1A since my daughter got diagnosed. I think we knew of 7 in the UK, and now we're knowing of a lot more, and actually possibly even bumping into them, which is really good. And the Facebook has really helped link families across, I'm really good friends with people in Canada and America, and we could see similarities in our children or in the adults. It's been really, really good. And I just, want to say thank you for that. But also,
well, Jackie just volunteered to be the ambassador for the UK families.
Yes.
And she's going to make sure that all the UK families enroll, because the more people in this data collection around the world, the more data that we could attract researchers to, and the more things that they can see what's outliers and what we thought were outliers, but actually is not an outlier at all. What you all, Lisa cannot get your whole community to enroll by herself. They're going to think she's a big nag. So if once you all enroll, you can get the word out that this is worth people's time and why it's important. Again, I said this earlier, data collection is not a sexy topic, but it's really, really important. And when you're rare, every single patient counts. And
the only other thing, I keep saying the only other thing, is I'm a little bit worried because I don't have a really deep medical understanding. And I wonder, some of us really like we need to work it all out, we need to understand it. But I guess it's just making sure we don't knock off people who know their children really well, but don't know the science really well. And it's making sure we still keep them on board to put their data in.
And that's why I like to be able to talk to people and say, this is not, you don't need to be able to read a PubMed or understand your genetic report to answer these questions. You don't need your medical records to answer these questions. This is something that you know. Now, as you get into deeper dives, you might need to have some medical, records. But you don't need to understand how the data is going to be used. You don't need to know the molecular background and all of that. It's great that Lisa and others know it, but what we know is our kids, and we are the experts. And we need to have a place to report everything about our kids. So the more data we can collect on the more people and get it to the most number of researchers, the faster this is going to work. The day will come where there will be clinical trials where several of our groups that look alike, walk alike, and quack alike can be in the same clinical trial, even though we have different genetic causes. And this type of database, RareX, with multiple similar diseases, is the perfect way to find those patients.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that. This is really helpful presentation. Really appreciate everyone's insightful questions. And again, just echoing Megan, we will again be making a push on social media to get everyone enrolled in the study. And if you all could be ambassadors for us and champion among our community, that would be so helpful, so the foundation is not just beating a dead horse, so to speak. But thank you again, and we will be in touch, Megan.
Fantastic. You guys have a good rest of your week.